You're listening to the Beyond Nurse Residency podcast, an educational series where we interview experts on all topics related to the transition of new graduate nurses into practice and beyond. I'm your host, Nicole Weathers, Director of the Iowa Online Nurse Residency Program. Thanks for joining us. Let's jump in. As we step into the new year, many nurse leaders and nursing professional development practitioners are asking ourselves, how can we improve retention, build stronger teams, and create environments where nurses like to show up and work? And one word that keeps coming up in conversation is engagement. In my opinion, retention doesn't happen without engagement. In fact, studies show that engaged nurses are significantly less likely to leave within that first year of practice. The challenge, though, is the recipe for engagement seems to be elusive for many. In today's episode, we're going to explore what engagement really means in nursing practice. We'll talk about how it shows up in the first year, why it matters, what gets in the way, and what we can do to strengthen it. My hope is that you will walk away with practical strategies you can use to foster engagement in your own organization, especially for the newest nurses who need it most. So today I'm thrilled to be back and talking about this topic, and I'm also very excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Katie Boston-Leary, to the conversation. So I thought we could start off by having you just introduce yourself and share a little bit about your current work.
Sure. Well, let me start by saying I'm very honored to be on your platform, Nicole. I you know how I feel about you. So I'm grateful to be in any space that you're in.
Oh, well, likewise, right? So you, just a quick little side note, Dr. Boston-Leary was kind enough to be a preceptor for me in my final semester of my DNP program and worked with me for an entire semester. And I learned so much from her. And I continue to watch her do amazing things out there for the nursing profession. And I am just beyond grateful that you're here with me today.
Oh, thank you. Well, it goes both ways, right? So I'm the Senior VP of Equity Engagement at the American Nurses Enterprise. And people always say, what's this enterprise thing? I thought this is the association. The enterprise includes the association and ANCC that a number of people are very familiar with designations for magnet and pathway and accreditation and excellence programs. And then we have the foundation. So the enterprise is the umbrella term for all those different entities. I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for over 30 years. I've been with ANA for close to 6. Prior to that, I was a chief nursing officer at a few hospitals in the state of Maryland, but made the long leap from practice to policy. It's been a very rewarding experience, because I get to work on a number of things, including nursing programs, things that impacts nurses the most. A lot of people know me for the work I've done in staffing. Now the work I do is related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also workforce, right, which is staffing, because those two things feed into each other. You know, if we create an environment where inclusivity is promoted, and everyone is able to be their authentic selves to perform optimally, that does in turn strengthen the workforce. And you cannot have a sustained, strengthened workforce without creating avenues for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's what I do, and that's who I am. I do a lot of research. I also go on Capitol Hill. I do a lot of speaking engagements. I write articles, and I try to mentor and support my fellow nurses and nurse leaders any way that I can. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, I appreciate that introduction, and I'm really excited to jump into our conversation. So we hear this word engagement a lot. It's tossed around, I feel like, in workforce conversations, but I think it does mean different things depending on maybe the setting. So engagement is one of those, I think, concepts too that feel a little abstract until we really dig into, what it means. So before we get into talking all about the challenges, I think it would be good to maybe start by just grounding us in your perspective on engagement. So how do you define it, and what does it look like in our day-to-day practice?
The engagement in the traditional sense has been mostly very one-sided. I think it's been mostly seen as what people or employees or individuals show that they're connected within a system or an organization and things like that. It's always been seen to me as this transactional term in terms of we do all these, so let's see what we're getting in return. And I really do think that it's mutual. It flows both ways. If you're in an institution or part of a system, you want to make sure that they're doing everything they can to keep you engaged and to validate or support your engagement. That would also then in turn show that you are engaged. At the same time, I've also heard things about how with newer generations that are coming into the profession, especially this started with the millennial generation, there was this saying about how you can engage this group, but they're not necessarily loyal to you. And with engagement, people look for loyalty, which I think is also the wrong way to look at things. I think it's more about it's very dynamic in terms of what you get from me today may be different tomorrow. What you get from me this hour may be different the next hour. And it's really because there are so many different things because we are fully like the systems that we operate in, humans are also open systems and we're easily influenced by the environment, which could change and impact how we're seen, how we engage, and whether we want to continue to be engaged. So that's the way I kind of see it. I think there needs to be a revisiting of what engagement really is and what it means to benefit both sides.
Yeah, I like that because I do think when we think of engagement, a lot of times, especially in the space of nurse residency, it's like, are we seeing what are we seeing that new nurse do for us that shows that they are engaged? And I do think that does seem very transactional. And so I do like the fact that you kind of brought emphasis to this idea that it's a mutual thing and that it's dynamic and continually changing because it's not like we're going to achieve engagement one day and then that's it, right? It's going to be a continuous process, a continuous working towards sort of improvement or retaining that engagement, I guess you would maybe say. And so I think those are important things to kind of set the stage as we talk about kind of what comes next.
Oh, absolutely. Because we know that a number of institutions do employee engagement surveys. And that's where the crazy making starts, right? Because these surveys are done and then the results that a lot of organization leaders want are not necessarily reflected in the scores. And then here comes the work, right? Well, let's do some interviews. Let's do some action plans. And the other thing that I recall, again, being, and it happens also because we do engagement surveys at ANA. From the time you complete the survey to the time you get the results, you don't know what you were thinking back then. But then as a leader, like, okay, so what happened? Why did you respond this way? I said, well, I don't know. I mean, when was it again? What was happening during that time? So I really do think that we have to get out of the quicksand on this, right? And look at engagement as a very fluid, dynamic term where it's really something that changes on a dime based on what people face. One of the best lines that I heard from a mentor of mine said this, because I was in this place where I felt like I was doing everything and nothing mattered. And she said something that I'll never forget. And she said this to me over 20 years ago. She said, a nurse is as good as their last shift. They're as good as their last shift, Katie. And that really is so true because I can do all the pizza parties and all the recognition things that I want, but how did that last shift go? How did nurses feel? Do they feel valued? There was a new nurse that shared about how being a nurse is one of the only professions where you can move from saving a life 1 minute to another minute, someone asking you for a sandwich, right? So we have to continue to figure out how we keep our fingers on the pulses of engagement and adjust accordingly and move away from these traditional approaches to measuring it and create all this back end work of action planning and all the other things that comes with employee engagement surveys.
Okay, so I think moving on to talking about now why engagement is such a critical factor, and then sort of the positive and negative downstream effects when maybe engagement is present versus when it's missing.
And I think we're stuck with this because we don't have another term. I've heard satisfaction, but I don't know that that is the word. When I was in the Middle East on an assignment years ago, because we have to also look at how, and which is not typically done, but how we measure patient engagement or patient satisfaction against nurse engagement, nurse satisfaction, because those two are correlated. They really are. And I don't know that correlation is happening when reports come out to say, well, we know that patient engagement was here. Where was nursing? Because there are a lot of organizations that would overlook nurse engagement scores or employee engagement scores and chase patient satisfaction, patient engagement scores. And those two feed into each other, right? So we have to, that's one way of addressing it differently. But I remember in the Middle East, back to that, I remember touring this hospital, Seha in Abu Dhabi, and they had me look at their board where they put up all their wins for periods of time quarterly. And they had patient happiness and happy with a Y, right? And I thought that was interesting. And I said, why are you using that word? Was that a direct translation? Which was a foolish thing to ask because most of these institutions are, they're English speaking because they have a lot of nurses from other parts of the world that care for patients. So a lot of the language that they use to communicate in institutions there is English. But that, of course, could vary when you interact with patients, right? Where you use the language that people can respond to. But I was curious. I said, why not engagement? Why not experience? Why not satisfaction? Why happiness? That is a long reach. Like because no one's happy coming into healthcare, right? But the only groups that you can say that for, of course, if the outcome is different what you intended and what you didn't what you expected did not happen and it's a better outcome, you're kind of happy, but maybe more relieved. Or the best example is having a baby. Of course, people are happy, but then a whole new set of worries come to mind, right? Uh, so who is completely happy? So why would you choose that? And they said it was intentional. They said it was intentional because they felt that they have to set the bar for that being what they strive for. Like, we know that this is the last place you want to be, but we're going to do everything in our power to seek your happiness. Happiness in terms of how we care for you, happiness, not the circumstances, but just being happy with how you were treated, how you were cared for, the compassion that we showed, and all that. And I was like, that was just so mind blowing to me. And this is the same institution that talk about with what we just discussed about engagement that uses color codes for nurses when they show up for work. They put a color code up on the board to show how they're feeling, red for not so good, yellow for I'm kind of in the middle, and green for I'm really good. And they just put up these dots on this wall, and they had a process for when leaders would ascend and support if they saw more reds and yellows and green. So to me, that's the correlation I was just talking about. Like, we care real time about how you're feeling. And our goal is to measure whether our patients are happy with us. So I think that is some of the shifting that needs to happen when it comes to engagement, because it feels like currency. Feels like I give you this, so now you need to prove to me that what I'm doing is working. And logically that makes sense, but again, it just feels so transactional, especially since we don't measure it real time. So I think there is another word that we could probably use But I'm not sure engagement is the word, but until we figure that out, we're stuck with engagement. But what we can do is measure it differently.
That's a really interesting way to kind of look at it. And, I mean, a lot of times when we think of like, what does healthcare need in terms of improved patient outcomes, it does seem like it obviously comes back to the staff who are providing the care for the patients, and what they can give to that patient care depends on sort of that yellow, red, and green system that you were talking about, right? I can only give what I have. And if I'm coming into work with not being maybe in that green zone, that means that I do need a little additional support and additional help. So that is such an interesting, I think, way to look at it, and a really interesting way to do something more in real time. So you talked about like our engagement scores, and how that's like one point in time, we capture it, we look at it, maybe finally 3 months, 6 months later, and that time is fleeting and it's gone and we can't do anything about it anyway. So that's a really, I think, just interesting idea of how you might be able to capture some of that a little bit better in real time. And this idea that maybe it's not engagement that we need to be measuring, but it's these underlying ingredients, if you will, to what helps me show up and be engaged.
Right. And I think, again, going back to being open systems, if I'm not doing well at home, you're not going to get you're going to get something from me. And some people are able to compartmentalize and shut things off when they get to the institution. But I bet you that, and we rise to the occasion because of who we are. We're nurses when we're in the care setting. But if I'm not doing well at home, if I'm barely making ends meet, I'm having issues within my family unit. The neighborhood that I live in isn't safe. Having car trouble, that is going to affect those scores. Now, I'm not suggesting that organizations are the ones to fix all the personal issues that nurses have, but there's an opportunity to show that you're open to and care enough where there's a place for that. If you want to bring it here in the professional setting. I love work that Gallup did on this a few years ago. And there's this book by Jim Clifton called Well-Being at Work. And he talks about how as leaders, we have to care about all the various facets of well-being for us to be able to move the dial on the relationship that we have with the people that we lead. So he talks about how we should care about social well-being, community well-being, financial well-being, physical well-being, social well-being, like all the different aspects of a person. And the example they gave was you're not going to get high engagement from someone who dodges bullets to come to work every day or has to worry about their children dodging bullets to get home from school. And we have to create openings for us to assess the full well-being of the people that we employ or the people that we lead to make sure that we understand fully who's in front of us. Because we focused a lot more on absenteeism from a human resources perspective and managing a people perspective, but the presenteeism piece is real too, where you are here, but not really because of all the other things that you face. So how do we shine a light on the presenteeism piece of the people that we lead, not necessarily presenting ourselves as fixers of all their issues, but to at least show that we care. How do we do that?
I think there's two things that kind of come to mind. So one is we had Dr. Rose Sherman on a podcast, but she talked about kind of the same idea. And she kind of used the term like social determinants of work health. So these aren't things that work can necessarily fix for you, but they are things that impact your ability to work, right? Your ability to show up and be quote unquote engaged. And then the other thing I always think about when we talk about this is that and I'm sure you've seen this, that video that Cleveland Clinic put out years ago around like human empathy, right? And the people walking down the hall and you don't know what their story is. And I think, the same holds true when you have an employee coming into your organization. Like you don't know what they're bringing with you. So having that level of understanding and compassion that everybody has something can really, I think, go a long ways and just making employees feel a little bit more valued and cared about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
How do we do this? Like, are there things that we can do to foster stronger engagement? What are maybe the big key ingredients that you see that maybe organizations need to think a little bit more about?
So I think it starts on entry, initial employment, and asking questions beyond what we hope to get from people in terms of their skill set. And I think this was an example from the Well-Being at Work book. It really requires us to understand, other than the skills that's required of you to perform in this role, what other abilities do you have? What other things that are present that could impact your ability to be 100% productive and effective at work? What motivates you? When are you at your best? When are you at your worst? What can your team count on you for? I think setting that up at the start, there's the institution level, but then there's also the department level. That's what starts to build this sense of someone feeling that you really do care about me. And if you care about me, what you get back is all that you can get from me. Not just from the skill sets that I have, but you're gonna have my heart too, in everything that I do. And I think for any leader, it's a great team exercise. It's kind of like that show on NBC, The Story of Us. Like, how do you build a story of us for your team? So everyone knows where everybody is and what they bring to the table, and not just from a nursing skills perspective, but everything else, because nurses are so multi-layered. Like, it's hard to find a nurse that only, like, all I do is nursing. There's nothing else other than caring for my family. Like, there's so many other things they bring to the table, skill sets, experiences, passions. And I think that is something that should be extracted and understood and leveraged appropriately. So people do feel like, oh my gosh, okay, that I love crocheting. In the break room, there's a basket of materials for me to crochet during my break. Like how do we unearth those things so that sets up an environment people feel that you care, that then turns into people giving you their all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I always think about this, especially from a nursing perspective. So we've figured out that that's how we need to treat our patients, right? This holistic view of the patient, not just the disease that they present with, but all the other things that they need to live a healthy life. And so why is it so hard, do you think, for us to do the same for our employees?
Oh, it's because of the culture and traditional sense of what nursing is supposed to be that still reigns true today. We've been conditioned to believe that nursing is tough, and for you to be in it, you have to be tough, and you have to weather the storms and that's true to a certain extent. But there's a softness that we always want nurses to exude when they're in front of patients, but we don't build it into the systems where people work, where it changes how we address and interact with each other. How leaders also support their teams and vice versa. There's this constant play of hardness and softness that is okay here, but is not within a patient's confines. But outside of that, it's not. And I think that is part of what has made it so hard for people to flip the switch. Now, some organizations and some leaders are doing really great things. I remember reading this article. I think there was this nurse that won the Nurse Leader Award, Daisy Nurse Leadership Award, and she made it her goal. One of her staff said that she stated that her goal is to make the workplace or the environment feel like Disney.
Yeah. Wow.
Exactly. So how do we And doing that doesn't mean that you don't take the work seriously. It just means that you care about everything. You care about patient care, but you care about the care of your nurses too. So I think that is the thinking. It's a lot of what we've only reserved for patients should be turned inward for us to care for ourselves better. And it's going to take some structural, systemic, and psychological shifts for us to start thinking and acting that way.
So definitely this idea of organizations or leaders valuing kind of the whole nurse is what I'm hearing you say, one of the maybe key ingredients to engagement are there other things that you've identified that, must be present for a nurse to be engaged from like the organizational standpoint?
Yeah, address their issues, address their concerns. And we know that a lot of the concerns and issues that nurses have to practice today are so multifaceted and layered, but at least make an attempt, work on it with them, engage them in that process to address those issues and keep track of them so that they see that, we started here. This is where we are now. We're making progress because it's hard to see it when you're in it. So workload has been one of the things that we have not dealt with enough in nursing as a major issue for nurses. And if we start really addressing the workload issue, and not just the physical workload, but it's the cognitive workload, it's the psychological workload, it's the physical, I already said that, but all the different aspects of workload that makes it hard for people to want to stay in the profession needs to be addressed. And I think once those things are addressed, that is a love language that nurse leaders can have for the teams that they lead. Like, show me you care by addressing my issues. And once you address my issues and have me at the table with you to address those issues, that is a big time way of showing me that you care about me. Even in our personal relationships, right? That's the currency. Why is it different in the professional setting?
Absolutely. Like, I mean, as you're talking about this in my brain, I'm thinking like physical safety. Do I feel safe at work? Professional safety. So that's where, safe staffing and things like that come into place. But also this idea maybe too of psychological safety. And do I feel comfortable speaking up about my issues and concerns, that they are going to be heard and dealt with, and that it's not going to be two fingers pointing back at me that say that I'm the reason that this is an issue, but that they will actually hear and listen and act and do something.
Right. Because all those things lead to well-being continuum for nurses, where if you're not addressing my issues, and every day I come in, it feels like it's becoming harder and harder for me to do the simplest things, then I'm stressed. Then I feel burnt out. Then apathy sets in. Then depression comes. And then in some cases, worst case scenario, suicidal ideation. So we have to connect to all these things. We can't say that we care about nurses' well-being and not address their issues, or brush it off to say, well, because that's what's required, because you signed up to be a nurse, this is what it is. This is the nature of the beast. Take it or leave it. That's part of the reason why we're still here, because that mentality still exists in a number of institutions and people that lead those institutions. So we have to disrupt that.
Because you can know what you signed up for, and it still, for a lot of human beings, I mean, you can't continually take that, right? Like, you can know that the work that you signed up for was going to be hard, that you were going to have to work odd shifts, that you were going to have to be away from your family on holidays, that, patients' needs often come first. You can know all of that going into nursing, but that doesn't make it any easier.
It doesn't. And there's this belief that, I'm dating myself, but there used to be the Roadrunner cartoon where he would clock in every day, him and Wile E. Coyote clock in every day, and then they'll chase each other all day, and then they'll clock out and they'll go, we'll see you tomorrow. There's no real reset in nursing where I have a horrible day today. I go home, I sleep it off, spend time with my family, sleep it off, and come back the next day, and it's a clean slate again. No such thing. The body keeps score.
Right.
This is one encasement, and this is all compounding and acute and accretive. So after a while, to your point, Nicole, it gets to this point where you say, I can't do this anymore. And it could happen and it could be one little thing that can get you to that place of saying, I'm done. And people wonder why. It's just this little thing that happened. No, it's not. It's the accumulation of all the things that I've been housing in this encasement all this time that has not been dealt with, that has caused me to say, I'm good now. I'm going to go pursue something else.
Talking to a lot of people, and this comes up a lot. Wonder if you would speak to this a little bit. So, this whole mentality sometimes too of like, well, I mean, I came up as a nurse and, 20 years ago, we just put on our big girl panties and we dealt with it, right? Like, or we just got through it, kind of that toughness mentality. And that's just not happening today. And maybe you could speak a little bit to what's changed and why maybe it's not happening the same way today.
Well, it just likens to the conversations that we'll have with our parents and grandparents where we say, we had it worse than you. We didn't have shoes. We tied bread bags around our feet. We didn't have cars. We walked everywhere. And we know how off-putting that is. And yes, that does play out in nursing where it's like, well, I delivered care during a time where we had 10 patients, 12 patients at a time, and you guys just have 6. I think what people tend to be missing when they say that is they're not taking everything into account. The work may have been harder then, but it was a lot simpler. Even though the workload supposedly is not hard, but again, we just went through the different layers of workload. It's not just physical. And there's so many other things that nurses have to contend with to practice. So when you think about all the complexities, there's nothing simple anymore. Complexity seems to be sexy. Like, let's make it hard for you and you're going to really like it because it requires you to really twist your brain to use it. It's not as intuitive. Like, why is that okay? So I think there's simplicity piece that we're not seeing compared, with the then to now where it's everything. It's about everything that I have to do, care for, address, manage, that should make me want to be able to give the care that a patient deserves compared to then where it was more physically taxing, but they didn't have to deal with computers. They didn't have to deal with all these different subspecialty docs where you don't know who the attending is. They didn't have to deal with polypharmacy and all these different ailments the patients come through the door is. Like, there's no easy patient anymore. There's so much complexity now in the world compared to back then. And that's what tends to be missing, in these arguments. And when you talk to folks, they'll say, well, yeah, it was complex. Yes, but we're talking about a continuum of complexity too. And I think that is the difference with this time compared to quote unquote back then.
Right. I mean, I think about very first year in nursing, like hand, writing patient documentation and like checking boxes that this med was given or, very simple, not like I have to navigate through these 17 screens to find the place where I can now document care and I have to do it here and there and everywhere. So there's just so much more, I think, in terms of complexity that factors in.
I mean, if you think about, there's this whole thing about why don't nurses what's the problem? Why should nurses float? We all know what that comes with. When you float to another unit, all the permissions are new. Like all the access that you had in this one place is not in this other place. Phone calls has to be made. And it's not just accessing the documentation. The supply rooms have different codes. And, it's like even the bathrooms have codes. It's so the complexities is what makes it harder now than it was even a couple years ago. And I say that the EHR in healthcare is one of the biggest broken promises because there was a promise of simplicity with EHRs that never came. There was also a promise that the physical chart will be gone. That hasn't happened. So now I got to look at 2 things. I got to find things in the chart, physical chart, and I got to look at things in a computer. right? And I got to look at my patient, and I got to deal with the family, and all these other disciplines that contribute to care. So it's just all of those things. So what's that movie? Everything all at once. It's everything all at once right now, and it's getting worse. We've subconsciously built a system for nurses to spend less time with their patients.
Oh, absolutely. I think if nurses could just go and do patient care, satisfaction and engagement would probably skyrocket, right? It's all the other things that make it.
That's where the joy is, right? And that is becoming more and more a lost art because everything that we're building in these systems is making me spend less time. Like I'm being willed by systems and technology more than what my patients are telling me and their families.
So we talk a lot with new nurses. We work with organizations, of course, in this program related to nurse residency programs. Nurse residency programs, I think for a lot of organizations are a really good tool to begin to engage nurses from day one when they're starting at the organization, right? We're working on competency. We're working on giving them the safe space to learn, to develop those relationships. A lot of the things that maybe we've talked about today in terms of key drivers of, getting an engaged nurse. However, they don't always equal retention. So just because maybe I've put this residency program into place, we still might be losing nurses, right? They might be leaving. Do you have any thoughts around that? And maybe what leaders are, maybe it's the way they're looking at nurse residency programs, how they're hoping nurse residency programs maybe solve all of their challenges. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that, especially when it comes to first-year nurses and engaging first-year nurses and retaining those first-year nurses.
One of the toughest transitions to make in life, actually, because especially lately, we just talked about the current day nursing practice. You have to go from being in this somewhat protected environment to now everything that you do could be the difference between life and death. And then that is all contingent on you having a great support system in the institution with a good preceptor, mentor, coach, what have you. And we know that in a lot of institutions that's lacking. So I think there's a lot of stock being put into, we have this residency program, and I was one of those CNOs, but we don't take a good enough look at what also is the wrap around that program to make it successful. And I remember having a nurse residency program where it really became a place for nurses to come and cry because there was no room for that, a space for that with their preceptors. And rather than, a lot of times we'll have the curriculum set up where we're going to go over delegation and the multi-generational workforce, you have your curriculum and you go, we can't do this today. We got to deal with this issue. Because once one person starts crying, it just sets off this domino effect. So the support then tends to fall on the people running those programs who've not received any coaching or training to deal with those emotions. And some people do a decent job. Some people don't manage it at all. And some people do a great job. But I think there are more instances of people not dealing with it that well because, again, we've been conditioned to believe that the emotions don't belong here unless you're truly happy, right? And that's the only emotion we want to see. So we have to really think about how we create room for understanding fully. I have this program and I have invested in this program, but do we have preceptors that are supportive and strong and they're not subjecting people to what they probably went through, the trial by fire they went through to get on the other side? Do we have a place for nurses to be able to rate their preceptors and not have it be a one-sided affair where it's the preceptors rating the residents? Do we have a way of them also assessing who they report to, the charge nurse, the manager, in terms of providing them that support? how do we also bridge them in terms of their skill sets? Because we know that more and more the programs are not able to give them the hands-on clinical skills that they need. So they're coming in less and less prepared around the time that patients are becoming sicker and sicker. What does that bridge look like to make sure we shore up those skill sets? And are we truly assessing the skill sets that they're coming to the table with when they are hired on? Rather than the typical, we're going to do an IV skills day. And like, how do we really understand when nurse leaders bring in agency nurses, there's a skills checklist that they have to do that checks through not just what you've done, but what equipment you've touched, what you've been exposed to in terms of care methodologies and things like that. We have to have that for these nurses too. Because some of them do come to the table with some more than others may come in because they probably have experience in a hospital setting as a patient care tech or what have you. They may need less. But there might be some folks that are making a complete switch from working in a bank to being in nursing. And I just went through this program and I'm supposed to have these skill sets. And no one's really taking the time to assess what you bring to the table on the front end. So we usually are not using appreciative inquiry to understand what they bring to the table. We're actually assessing them from a place of lack. Like, what skills do you lack? And we'll figure out whether we can meet those skills. And you're under the gun because you're supposed to be done in X amount of time.
And this is our standard program. So this is what we're going to do because this is how we built it. Yeah, that's something we've been talking a lot about as a team is how can we better personalize this experience? I mean, we know that research shows that these are the skills that are often lacking. These are the things that we can work on. But that isn't necessarily maybe true anymore because, as you said, people are coming in from very different backgrounds. They bring a lot of unique things with them. And I think taking that into consideration. One of the things I want to just back up to, and you were kind of talking about this as far as, we put this residency program into place. We're providing them with the competencies and the skills and maybe even the preceptor connection. Hopefully our preceptors are trained and they're doing a good job. But I sometimes think or wonder, I guess, if some of our retention issues are not necessarily from the residency program or what it's maybe missing, but the fact that our work environments don't necessarily mimic the kind of, care and support, if you will, that they're getting in this residency program. So they go to the residency program, they talk about the skills, they have this great person who's working with them through some of their experiences, and then they go out into the work environment and it's kind of can feel like a battleground sometimes. And so sometimes it's maybe that discrepancy that is also challenging for building engagement and retention.
Yeah, I think because there's a need for human-centered design. Like we're working a lot of systems that were designed by humans, but they're not for humans. Like they're really set up for superhumans. And I remember listening to this podcast with this leader of his tech company who had to will her team to understand that they need to listen to people in building these systems. And they were annoyed at that because it's really more about the sterile environment of, well, it's the outcome that matters. A lot of the steps in between don't. We just need to train them to do it. And that's the case for a lot of systems that we use in healthcare. The output is more like EHRs. I remember when we went live with a new HR system, I remember hearing this loud and clear from people at high levels saying, we'll know everything's working when we drop a bill. Like, what? What about all the other things in between? And they would say that constantly, that when we know we can drop a bill, we know things that we've had a successful go live. Like, no. You can still drop a bill, but people be suffering in the middle. So are we looking at the right things in what we design? Because we assume that just because humans design something means that it's being designed for humans. No, it's actually being designed for the output that's intended. And sometimes the output that was intended is not even met. It creates something else, right? So there has to be attention paid to the true outcome of what's being built, and the fact that everything should be centered around humans, human-centered design. I hate saying this, but for the most part, for a lot of things that we use, it's lost in our systems. Or even if it was built initially, by the time we continue to tweak it and set up, look at how heavily protocolized nursing is. And we talked for years and continue to talk about how, we want people to bring in their critical thinking to what they do and how they practice. But because of fear-based thinking and how litigious and risky our environments are, it's heavily protocolized. And the systems then that you have to work within are very unforgiving. Like if it doesn't allow you to color outside the lines a little bit based on what you see, what your patient's presenting. So all those things need to be looked at for us to get on the other side of where we are so that we can have retention and engagement, and people would feel happiness to a certain degree when they enter into these spaces to practice as a nurse.
I mean, I think, what you said about we'll know the EHR is working when we drop a bill. I feel like that same mentality is applied to nurse residency. We'll know our nurse residency program is working when we retain our staff. But there's so many, like you said, there's so much more kind of in the middle of that we aren't considering.
Right, because we don't take into account why they're staying. We just care about the fact that they're staying. They could be staying because they don't want to disrupt their benefits. They could be staying because they're waiting for another year or two to make sure that it doesn't look on their resume as if they're job hopping, right? There's so many reasons people may be staying, not necessarily because the system's working. They just did the math and said, this is where I am for now. But eventually I may be over here because I need to continue to pursue happiness. A lot of nurses throughout their careers are pursuing that. And unfortunately, some towards the end of their careers never get that because we haven't zoomed in on the fact that this is an important thing that we have to address in the profession. And it's sad.
It is, absolutely. Well, Katie, we've talked about so many great things today. We've talked about engagement, why it's important, some ingredients for success. We talked about, how this looks at nurse residency. But before we go, I have one last question I want to ask you. When it comes to nurse engagement, what's one thing you've seen an organization do that you think has made a significant difference? Something you wish maybe more organizations would adopt as we enter 2026?
Well, I gave you an example earlier with what I saw in Abu Dhabi, right? Where they had this continuous effort to assess where their nurses are. And they are striving to find a place of happiness at work for their patients and for their patients. And I think that correlation is important. The other example is, with the nurse that I mentioned that won the Daisy Award, like my job beyond the typical things that I have to do from a human resource perspective, but my job is also to make this environment conducive for you to be able to function optimally. So Disneying up my department is another example too. So I've seen both examples amount to longevity, retention, engagement, even for nurses, because people tend to leave for various reasons, not necessarily because, they're not happy with their workplace or their manager, but people may leave for whatever reason. But I've also seen examples where people so love where they are, they make it their job and their duty to find their replacement before they leave. Like they'll go out and recruit someone else from another department and say, you sure you don't want to work in my department? I'm leaving, but it would be great for you to come here. I've also seen examples where because people move for different reasons, because they want to change specialties and things like that, their specialty areas, I've seen organizations embrace that and remove the fear from that by setting up a period of time for people to put in systematically, okay, like draft day in sports, right? I'm in med surg today and I want to be in L&D. I'm going to, without any fear, without any repercussions or guilt and shaming for wanting to leave, I'm going to create this space for people to just say, okay, I have this skill set, and because of my passion, even though I work here, I want to be over there, and it's okay. And I've seen that work in a beautiful way where there's just open call for people to put in this centralized space where they feel they want to transfer to. And again, it's good to do that because instead of losing them entirely to another organization, you're keeping them in the organization and they're just moving around. And they'll put in their requests in this centralized place and all the leaders will review it. But then there's an understanding that from the leaders that you are not going to go back and shame these folks to, when they're making these requests. And because that's the first reaction. How could you leave after all that I've done for you and all the things we had and all the hugs that we shared? Like, how could you? Like, that should not be happening. So there's also that part of it. And it's a beautiful thing where they have overall retention because people just tend to move around within the organization, which is what you want.
Absolutely. And I think that's becoming more and more of the norm, too, that people aren't staying. They're not going to stay for 30 years in the same role. They want some of that mobility. And so how do we embrace that instead of having it work against us?
Yeah.
Well, Katie, I feel like we could talk and talk and talk about this topic forever, but I just want to, again, thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom and expertise on this topic. And I really appreciate all that you've shared with us today.
Happy to be here. And thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Nicole.
Wait, before you go, I want to make sure you know all about our suite of resources you can use to support your new graduate nurses. This includes our Academy, a coaching program designed for organizations as they prepare for the implementation and ongoing sustainability of a nurse residency program. Work one-on-one with residency program experts to make sure your organization is residency ready. Our Clinician Wellbeing course is an asynchronous online course that aims to enhance the well-being and resiliency of healthcare professionals, equipping them with the necessary psychological capital to navigate challenges inside and outside of work. Supporting Nurses is another asynchronous online course for preceptors, mentors, and coaches to learn the skills they need to support any new hire. Both of these offerings can be used as a standalone professional development opportunity or to augment any nurse residency program. And we can't forget about the program that started it all, the online nurse residency program. This includes a comprehensive curriculum designed to support new graduate nurses applying all the knowledge they learned in school to their practice. We focus on professional skills, personal well-being competencies, and new graduate nurses even get the opportunity to create real change in their own organization. Offered completely online and in a blended format, this program is highly adaptable to all clinical practice settings. You can learn more about all of these programs and more of what we offer using the links in the show notes below.